Mercury does not go backwards. The people who came up with this knew that, and they knew it 2,000 years ago. Both sides of the argument you have heard are arguing with somebody who is not there. There are two standard explanations of Mercury retrograde, and both of them are wrong in opposite directions. The first treats it as an event. Mercury reverses, and things go wrong on Earth while it does. The second is the correction, and it is usually delivered with some satisfaction. It is only an optical illusion. The planet does not really move backwards, therefore there is nothing here. That second one sounds like the careful position. It is not. It assumes the tradition thought the planet physically stopped, and the tradition never thought that. So it is worth doing this properly. First what is seen, then why, then what anyone is actually claiming about it. Start with the observation, because the observation is real and anybody can make it. Watch Mercury against the fixed stars over a couple of months. For most of that time, it moves steadily in one direction, night after night. Then it slows. It stops. For about 3 weeks, it moves the other way, back across ground it has already covered. Then it stops again and resumes. That is retrograde motion, and it is not a metaphor. Plot the positions, and you get a visible loop. This is not a modern discovery either. Anyone who watched carefully and wrote it down would find it, and people did, for centuries, long before there was a satisfying explanation for it. The word is doing exactly what it says. The question is what causes it. Here is the whole of it. Mercury is closer to the Sun than we are, so it goes round faster. It completes a lap in about 3 months, while we take a year. Most of the time it is on the far side of its orbit and moves across our sky in the usual direction. But every so often it comes round between us and the Sun and passes us on the inside. Think of overtaking on a motorway. The car you pass appears to slide backwards against the fields behind it, even though it is going forwards the whole time. That is all a retrograde is. Not the planet reversing. Us and it changing places, seen from a moving vantage point that never stops moving. And because it is a matter of relative position, it is entirely predictable. The dates are not a matter of opinion. They come out of 2 orbits and a bit of trigonometry. The geometry is not special to Mercury. Every planet does it, and the numbers fall out of how far away each one is. Mercury is apparently retrograde about 19% of the time, in stretches averaging 22 days. Mars manages 10%, but in much longer stretches, averaging 76 days. Jupiter is retrograde 30% of the time, and Saturn 37%. Read that last figure again. Saturn spends more than a third of every year apparently going backwards, and nobody has ever blamed a lost email on it. Take Mars, because Mars makes the point cleanly. Mars does the same thing, but only about once every 2 years. The last one ran from December of 2024 into February of the year after. 79 days of apparent reversal against Mercury's 20. Same effect. Same cause. Vastly different scale. And the reason is only that Mars is further out and slower. The overtake takes longer, and the loop it traces across the sky is correspondingly bigger. Nobody writes articles about it. Same geometry, 4 times the duration, almost none of the attention. There is one difference worth naming. With Mercury, the inner planet passes us. With Mars, we pass the outer planet. The geometry runs the opposite way round. One of those is us being overtaken. The other is us doing the overtaking. The visible result is the same, which is the interesting part. Whether you are overtaking or being overtaken, the other body appears to slide backwards while the pass is happening. That is what tells you the effect belongs to the viewing position and not to the planet. It shows up on both sides. So two planets on opposite sides of us produce the same appearance for the same reason, which means none of this is about Mercury in particular. Mercury is simply the one that does it most often. 3 times a year, every year, which is how it ended up with the reputation. If the folklore had been built around Saturn, it would have had to explain something happening for 4 months at a time, twice in some years. Frequency is doing a lot of work in how these things get talked about. A thing that happens 3 times a year is available as an explanation. A thing that happens for 1/3 of every year is just the weather. Now the part that gets left out of both standard explanations. The people who first modeled these loops were not trying to debunk anything. They were trying to predict. They built the epicycle model. A planet rides a small circle, and the center of that circle travels a larger one. Apollonius of Perga and Hipparchus put it together in the 2nd century before the Common Era. Half of the small circle runs against the direction of the large one. That is where the reversal comes from, and it comes out of the geometry rather than being added to it. Ptolemy formalized it in the Almagest in the 2nd century of the Common Era. The point is not that the model was right. It was not. The point is that it existed, and that its whole purpose was to reproduce the loop. Which brings us to the part the debunking version misses. Ptolemy wrote the Almagest. Ptolemy also wrote the Tetrabiblos. That second book is the one that systematized Western astrology. Same person, same century. The man who built the geometry that explains retrograde motion is the man who organized the astrology that talks about it. So when somebody says astrologers think the planet really goes backwards, there is a short answer. The person who wrote the foundational text also wrote the geometry in the same lifetime. Whatever the tradition is claiming, it is not that. And a criticism aimed at a position nobody holds does not land, however satisfying it is to deliver. What it is claiming is smaller and stranger. A planet cycle relative to us has phases. It appears ahead of the sun, then behind it. It is closest to us at one point and furthest at another. The retrograde stretch is one named phase of that cycle, and it happens to coincide with the planet being nearest. The tradition treats that phase the way it treats any phase, as a period with a character, not as the planet doing something to anybody. You can think that is unfounded. Plenty of people do. But it is a different claim from the one usually being argued against, and arguing against the wrong one is not much of an argument. Now the dates and why nobody agrees on them. The retrograde itself is bounded by 2 moments called stations, where the apparent motion turns. Those are exact and computable. But there are 2 more boundaries either side, called the shadow. The pre-shadow starts when the planet first reaches the degree it will later back up to. The post-shadow ends when it regains the degree where it turned round. Some sources quote the stations. Some include the shadows. The 2 answers can differ by 6 weeks, which is why the dates you see never match. Here are both for the one coming. Mercury stations retrograde on the 24th of October at 21 degrees of Scorpio. It stations direct on the 13th of November at 5 degrees of Scorpio. That is 20 days of apparent reversal and about 16 degrees of sky covered twice. Notice that it ends further back than it started. That is what backing up means, and the degrees are where the tradition looks. The pre-shadow began on the 4th of October and the post-shadow runs to the 30th of November. So depending on who you ask, this retrograde is 20 days long or nearly 2 months. Both numbers are correct. They are measuring different things. One thing this episode has not done is tell you whether any of it matters. That the loop is real is settled. That the phase can be dated to the day is settled. Whether the phase corresponds to anything in a human life is not settled, and nothing here has touched it. Those are separate questions, and they get confused constantly in both directions. People treat the reality of the geometry as evidence for the interpretation, and people treat the interpretation being doubtful as evidence that the geometry is a myth. Neither follows. What you can do is check the dates yourself. The stations are in every ephemeris and every planetarium program. The shadow boundaries take one more step. Find the degree at each station, then find when the planet first passed it and when it regained it. That is the whole calculation. It needs no belief in anything, and it settles who has quoted you the right dates. It is also a good habit for this subject generally. Almost everything repeated about astrology can be checked or cannot, and sorting the two is most of the work. So, 3 things. The loop is real, and it comes from the geometry of one body passing another. Every planet does it, Saturn for more than a third of the time, and Mercury is famous only for doing it often. And the dates disagree, because some people count the shadow and some do not. None of which tells you whether it means anything. It does tell you what is being claimed, which is the part both of the usual explanations get wrong. The planet is not reversing, and the people who talk about it never said it was. Next time, the slow wobble that pulled the whole zodiac out of line with the stars it was named after, and why 2 traditions answer that differently.